It was a warm evening inside a small roadside diner. The kind of place where the lights always glowed soft yellow and the smell of fresh coffee never seemed to fade. The booths were nearly full. Silverware clinked against plates, and quiet conversations blended with the low hum of the kitchen behind the counter. At the center of it all stood a young black waitress named Naomi. She wore a clean white button-up shirt tucked neatly into her apron. Her hair pulled back into a simple bun. Despite the long shift, she carried herself with calm confidence, moving smoothly between tables with a polite smile. Most customers barely noticed her, just another waitress doing her job. Then she saw it. A leather wallet, resting near the edge of a booth where a middle-aged man in a tailored navy suit had been sitting minutes earlier. Naomi picked it up without hesitation. She didn't open it, she didn't check inside, she simply walked toward the man, who had just returned from the restroom and now stood near the counter, looking distracted. "Sir," she said gently, extending both hands, "you left this at your table." The man froze. He looked down at the wallet, then up at Naomi's face. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in surprise. Slowly, he reached out and took it from her hands. "That's mine," he said, clearly relieved. "Thank you." Naomi smiled politely. "Of course." But before the moment could end, a loud voice cut through the diner. "What are you doing?" The manager stepped forward from behind the counter. His expression sharp, his posture rigid, he stared directly at Naomi, then at the wallet now in the man's hand. "Why were you holding a customer's wallet?" he demanded. The diner grew quieter. Naomi turned, confused. "He dropped it. I was just returning it." The manager scoffed. "That's not your place. You should have brought it to me." A few customers looked up from their meals. Some leaned back in their booths, sensing tension. Others exchanged glances, uncomfortable but curious. The man in the suit opened his mouth to speak, but the manager raised a hand, cutting him off. "I don't want excuses," he said sharply to Naomi. "Go to the back, now." Naomi felt her stomach tighten. She nodded slowly, her smile gone, and walked toward the hallway leading to the staff area. As she passed, whispers followed her, not loud, just enough to sting. Behind her, the man stood still, wallet clutched in his hand. Something about the scene didn't sit right with him. The way the manager's voice had changed. The way the room had gone quiet. The way Naomi hadn't argued, not once. He glanced down and finally opened the wallet. Everything was there, cash untouched, cards perfectly aligned, nothing missing. And suddenly, the relief he'd felt moments earlier was replaced by something else entirely. Unease. Because it was clear now, the woman who had done the right thing was the only one being treated like she hadn't. And this was only the beginning. Naomi had barely taken 3 steps toward the hallway when the manager's voice rose again. Louder this time. "Stop right there." She turned slowly. Every conversation in the diner faded into silence. Forks paused midair. Coffee cups hovered just above tables. All eyes shifted toward the counter. The manager stepped closer, his jaw tight. "I want this clear," he said, pointing toward Naomi. "We have rules here. Staff are not allowed to touch customers' belongings." Naomi swallowed. "I didn't go through it," she replied calmly. "I just picked it up and gave it back." "That's not the point," he snapped. "You don't decide that." The man in the navy suit finally spoke. "Sir, she did nothing wrong. I dropped the wallet." The manager cut him off without hesitation. "With respect, sir, this is an internal matter." That word, internal, landed heavily. Naomi felt heat rise in her chest. But she stayed quiet. She knew arguing would only make things worse. Around her, the tension thickened. Some customers avoided eye contact. Others stared openly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. The manager crossed his arms. "I've warned you before," he said to Naomi, lowering his voice just enough to sound dangerous. "You don't follow protocol." Naomi shook her head. "This is the first time this has ever happened." He scoffed. "That's what they all say." A woman in one of the booths frowned. A man near the window shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke up. The manager turned toward the register. "Go to the back. We'll deal with this after." Naomi nodded again, her hands trembling slightly as she walked down the narrow hallway. The walls felt closer than before. The sounds of the diner returned behind her, as if nothing had happened. Out front, the man stood frozen. He watched Naomi disappear through the door marked employees only. Something about the exchange replayed in his mind, not just the accusation, but the certainty in the manager's voice, as if guilt had already been decided. He looked around the diner. People went back to their meals. Life moved on. But he couldn't shake the feeling that a line had just been crossed. He glanced at the wallet again, then at the hallway where Naomi had vanished. And for the first time that night, he asked himself a question he hadn't expected. What happens to people who do the right thing, when no one is willing to defend them? Naomi stood in the narrow staff hallway, her back pressed lightly against the wall. The air smelled of cleaning solution and old paper receipts. Her apron was still tied neatly around her waist, but her hands had begun to shake. She hadn't even finished her shift. The manager pushed through the door moments later, his expression already set. He didn't ask her to sit down. He didn't lower his voice. "This isn't working anymore," he said flatly. Naomi looked up, confused. "I don't understand. I followed what I thought was right." "That's the problem," he replied. "You think too much. You act without permission." She took a slow breath. "I returned lost property. That's all." He reached for the clipboard hanging on the wall and pulled it down. "We can't afford incidents like this. Customers get uncomfortable. It reflects badly on the business." Naomi felt her chest tighten. The customer tried to explain. "I don't care," the manager interrupted. "The decision is made." He scribbled something on the paper, then tore off a small slip and held it out. "You're done here. Turn in your apron." For a second, Naomi didn't move. Her mind raced. Rent due next week. Groceries already running low. The extra shifts she'd asked for and never gotten. All of it crashed together in one silent moment. Slowly, she untied the apron and folded it in her hands. She placed it on the small counter without a word. "I was just trying to do the right thing," she said quietly. The manager shrugged. "Right doesn't pay the bills." She nodded once, then stepped past him and pushed through the back door. Outside, the night air felt cold against her skin. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Lights buzzing overhead. Naomi paused for a moment, steadying herself, then started walking. Inside the diner, the man in the navy suit watched from his booth as the manager returned alone. Something was wrong. He stood up and approached the counter. "Where is the waitress?" he asked. The manager barely looked up. "She's no longer employed here." The words hit harder than expected. The man clenched his jaw. He reached into his pocket and felt the weight of the wallet, heavy with cash. "Untouched. She returned something valuable to me," he said slowly. "And you fired her?" The manager sighed, clearly irritated. "We run a tight operation." The man said nothing more. But as he turned toward the door, one thought echoed louder than anything else that night. This wasn't the end of the story. The man stepped out of the diner and into the parking lot, the door closing softly behind him. The night had grown quieter. The earlier warmth of the restaurant replaced by a cool breeze that carried the smell of asphalt and rain. He stood beside his car and exhaled slowly. In his hand was the wallet Naomi had returned. For a moment, he simply stared at it. The leather was worn at the edges. Familiar. He had carried it for years, never once losing it before tonight. And now, for reasons he still didn't fully understand, its weight felt different. He opened it. The cash was still there. Every bill in place. His credit cards lined up exactly as he'd left them. Even a folded receipt from earlier that day hadn't been disturbed. Nothing was missing. He flipped through it again, more slowly this time, as if the result might somehow change. It didn't. The scene inside the diner replayed in his mind, Naomi's calm voice, the way she had held the wallet out with both hands, the manager's sharp tone, the sudden silence from the room. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't asked questions. She hadn't looked inside. And yet, she was the one who paid the price. He leaned against the car, his expression tightening. Over the years, he had dealt with countless negotiations, contracts, and people eager to prove themselves. He had learned to read intentions quickly. Naomi's intentions had been clear. What troubled him wasn't just that she had been fired, it was how easily it had happened. No discussion, no verification, just an assumption, followed by a decision. He glanced back at the diner through the glass windows. Inside, customers were laughing again. Plates were being cleared. The night was moving forward without pause. But he couldn't. He slipped the wallet back into his jacket pocket, then reached for his phone. He hesitated before unlocking it, his thumb hovering over the screen. This wasn't something he could ignore. Somewhere down the street, Naomi was walking away with nothing but the clothes she wore to work, carrying the weight of a choice she believed was right. The man straightened, his expression hardening with resolve. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know her story. But one thing was certain now. A woman who returned a wallet without touching a single dollar did not deserve to be punished for it. And whatever had just happened inside that diner, it was far from over. Naomi walked the last 2 blocks to her apartment with slow, steady steps. The night air was cool, and the streets were mostly quiet. A few storefronts were already dark, their lights switched off for the evening. She kept her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket, her shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. When she reached the building, she paused for a moment before going inside. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and old paint. The light flickered as she climbed to the 3rd floor and unlocked the door to her small studio apartment. Inside, the space was dim and silent. Naomi set her keys down on the counter and turned on the light. The room revealed exactly what she already knew: a narrow bed, a small table with 2 mismatched chairs, and a kitchenette barely large enough to cook a single meal at a time. She opened the refrigerator. Nearly empty. A carton of milk with only a little left. A container of leftovers she'd been stretching for days. Nothing else. She closed the door slowly and leaned against it, exhaling. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A notification from her bank. She didn't open it. She already knew what it would say. Rent was due in less than a week, and the extra shifts she'd counted on were gone. Naomi sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. She thought about the wallet. About how easy it would have been to walk past it. About how no one would have known. About how she'd never even considered that option. She had been raised to believe that doing the right thing mattered, even when no one was watching. Tonight, that belief felt heavy. She picked up her phone again and scrolled through her contacts, stopping on a few names before moving on. She didn't want to explain. Not yet. Instead, she placed the phone face down and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The faint hum of traffic outside filled the room. Somewhere across town, the man whose wallet she'd returned was probably settling back into his life, unaware of what the moment had cost her. Naomi closed her eyes, swallowing the tightness in her throat. She didn't regret what she'd done. But for the first time, she wondered how long she could afford to keep choosing right in a world that didn't seem to reward it. And she had no idea that the decision she made that night would soon change everything. The next morning began like any other for the man in the navy suit. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of his office, reflecting off polished glass and steel. From the outside, the building looked like just another corporate tower downtown. Inside, decisions were made that moved markets. He stood by the window for a long moment, jacket still on, wallet resting on the desk behind him. Naomi's face came back to him again. Not her smile, but her silence. The way she hadn't defended herself. The way she'd accepted the manager's words without anger. He turned and picked up the phone. "Find out who she is," he said to his assistant calmly. "The waitress from last night. The diner on Maple Street." There was a brief pause. "What exactly should I look for?" "Everything," he replied. "Her name, her work history, why she was fired." The call ended. He sat down and opened his laptop, though his attention never fully landed on the screen. In his world, people rarely did the right thing without expecting something in return. Naomi had expected nothing, and lost her job because of it. An hour later, his phone buzzed. Her name was Naomi Carter. She'd worked at the diner for almost 2 years. No prior complaints, no disciplinary record, picked up extra shifts whenever they were available. Known among coworkers for being quiet and reliable. And fired the same night she returned a lost wallet. He leaned back in his chair, his expression tightening. The assistant continued. "She lives alone, small apartment, no other employment listed." The man closed his eyes briefly. This wasn't about money. He had more than enough of that. What bothered him was the pattern, how easily someone like Naomi could be dismissed. Erased, without a second thought. He stood and walked back to the window. From this height, the city looked orderly, predictable, fair. But he knew better. People like Naomi didn't get second chances. They didn't have lawyers on speed dial or savings to fall back on. One decision, even a good one, could unravel everything. He picked up the wallet again, turning it over in his hands. If she had taken a single dollar, he said quietly to himself, this would be a different story. But she hadn't. He reached for his phone once more. Schedule something for this afternoon. He told his assistant, I want to return to that diner. There was a pause. For lunch? No, he said, for the truth. And somewhere across the city, Naomi was beginning another long day, unaware that someone with the power to change her life had decided not to walk away. The diner looked different in daylight. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, reflecting off the chrome edges of the booths. The lunch crowd had started to arrive, construction workers, office employees, a few regulars who came at the same time every day. Behind the counter, the manager moved quickly, calling out orders and forcing smiles at customers. When the door opened and the man in the navy suit stepped inside, the manager noticed immediately. He straightened his posture and wiped his hands on a towel before walking over. Welcome back, sir, he said, his tone noticeably warmer than the night before. Table for one? The man nodded calmly and took a seat near the counter, the same area where everything had happened. As he sat down, his eyes scanned the room. Naomi wasn't there. Another waitress approached with a menu. What can I get you to drink? Just coffee, he replied. And tell me, where is the waitress who worked here last night? The one who returned my wallet. The woman hesitated. She doesn't work here anymore. The manager stepped in quickly. We had to let her go, he said lightly. Staffing changes happen. The man looked up at him. Is that so? Yes, sir, the manager replied. We run a professional operation. The man nodded but said nothing more. He stirred his coffee slowly, watching the manager move behind the counter, joking with customers as if nothing unusual had occurred. But the atmosphere felt different now. The man waited. After a moment, he reached into his jacket and placed the wallet gently on the counter, letting it rest there in full view. You see this? He asked quietly. The manager glanced down, then back up. Yes, sir. This was on the floor. The man continued. Your employee returned it without opening it, without hesitation. The manager shifted his weight. That may be true, but... And yet, the man interrupted, his voice still calm. She was accused, then fired. A few nearby customers began to listen. The manager forced a laugh. Sir, you don't understand our policies. The man met his eyes. I understand integrity. Silence settled over the counter. The manager's smile faded. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The man took a sip of coffee, then stood up slowly. I'll be back, he said, and when I return, I expect an honest conversation. As he walked toward the door, the manager watched him go, a tight feeling forming in his chest. For the first time since the night before, he sensed something he hadn't considered at all. This customer wasn't finished. And whatever was coming next would not be handled behind closed doors. The man returned to the diner less than an hour later. This time, he didn't come alone. Two people followed him inside, both dressed simply but moving with quiet confidence. They stood near the entrance as he walked back to the counter, the familiar wallet once again in his hand. The lunch crowd had grown thicker. Conversations paused when they noticed the shift in energy. The manager looked up and froze for a brief moment before forcing a smile. Welcome back, sir, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier ease. The man didn't sit down. Instead, he placed the wallet on the counter, louder than before. I want to be very clear, he said, his voice steady but carrying across the room. This wallet was returned to me by a woman named Naomi. Heads turned. The manager stiffened. Sir, we've already discussed this. No, the man replied. You avoided it. The room grew quiet. She found my wallet on the floor. He continued. She didn't open it. She didn't take anything. She returned it immediately. A woman near the window nodded slowly. A man at the counter leaned closer. And yet, the man said, his eyes fixed on the manager. She was accused of wrongdoing and fired on the spot. The manager cleared his throat. We follow policy. Employees aren't allowed to. Policy does not excuse injustice. The man interrupted. And it does not excuse assumptions. The manager's face flushed. You're making a scene. The man nodded. Because what happened deserves to be seen. He opened the wallet and held it up. Everything is here. Every dollar. Every card. Murmurs rippled through the diner. She lost her job for doing the right thing, he said, and that tells me more about this place than any menu ever could. The manager glanced around, realizing the room was no longer on his side. A customer spoke up. That's not right. Another added, I saw her. She didn't do anything wrong. The manager's voice dropped. Sir, we can talk privately. No, the man replied. This happened publicly. So will the truth. He turned toward the room. If integrity isn't valued here, then people deserve to know. Silence followed, heavy and unavoidable. The man took a step back. I will be contacting ownership. As he walked toward the door, the manager stood frozen behind the counter, the weight of every watching eye pressing down on him. And somewhere across town, Naomi had no idea that her name was being spoken, not in blame this time, but in defense. Naomi didn't expect the phone call. She was sitting at the small table in her apartment, staring at a notebook where she'd been listing expenses and crossing out anything that wasn't essential. The numbers didn't work, no matter how many times she rearranged them. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Naomi Carter? A man asked. Yes. My name is Daniel Ross, he said. I believe we met briefly last night at the diner. Her chest tightened. Yes, sir. I'm calling because I'd like to speak with you in person, he continued, if you're willing. Naomi sat up straighter. About what? About what happened, and what comes next. There was a pause. Naomi looked around her apartment, the quiet room, the empty refrigerator, the notebook on the table. When? She asked. That's up to you, he replied. I can arrange a ride. An hour later, Naomi sat across from him in a quiet office downtown. The space was simple, professional, no excess, no distractions. Daniel spoke first. I confirmed what I saw last night. You did nothing wrong. Naomi nodded slowly. I know. He studied her for a moment. Most people would have walked away from that wallet. I couldn't, she said. It wasn't mine. He leaned forward slightly. And you lost your job because of it. Yes. Daniel exhaled. That shouldn't happen. He slid a folder across the table. Naomi didn't touch it. I'm not here to offer charity, he said. I'm offering opportunity. She looked up, surprised. I believe character matters, Daniel continued, and people with character deserve support, not punishment. He paused. I'd like to help you get back on your feet. Training, a position with one of my companies, a chance to choose your next step. Naomi's hands trembled slightly. Why? Because doing the right thing should never leave someone worse off, he said simply. Naomi took a breath. For the first time since the night before, the tightness in her chest loosened. She hadn't asked for help. But someone had seen her. And everything was about to change. Several weeks passed. For the first time in a long while, Naomi's days no longer began with anxiety. Mornings had structure now, purpose. She sat at a desk inside one of Daniel Ross's office buildings. Sunlight streaming through the windows just as it had on the day they met again. A small name badge rested beside her keyboard, simple, professional, no apron, no rushed orders, no fear of being spoken down to. The transition hadn't been easy. There were lessons to learn, systems to understand, moments when Naomi questioned whether she belonged in a place like this. But no one here raised their voice. No one assumed the worst. When she asked questions, she was answered, not dismissed. Daniel checked in occasionally, never hovering. You're doing well, he told her during one quiet afternoon meeting. Not because I helped you. Because you showed up. Naomi nodded. I just did what I always do. That's exactly why you're here, he replied. She still passed the diner sometimes on her way home. The sign looked the same. The windows still glowed at night. But it no longer felt like a place that held power over her life. It was just a building now, a chapter that had closed. One evening, Naomi stopped at a grocery store on her way back to her apartment. She filled her cart without calculating every item. When she reached the register, she paid without hesitation. Outside, she paused, bags in hand, breathing in the cool air. She thought back to the wallet. To the moment she'd chosen to do what felt right, even when it cost her everything she thought she had. She hadn't known then where that choice would lead. But now she understood something clearly. Integrity doesn't always bring immediate reward. Sometimes it brings loss first. But when it's seen, truly seen, it has the power to open doors that would never open any other way. Naomi walked on, steady and confident. Her life hadn't changed because of money. It had changed because someone chose to recognize her character. And that made all the difference.